If you like history, then I have something interesting to share with you about the timing of the birth of Jesus from a history perspective. Christmas and the birth of Jesus is personally significant to many of us. But if you zoom out a bit, and if you look at it as a world event, and if you look at it from a historic perspective and say, what led up to this event? The years that led up to the actual event happening, the thousands of years, and especially the last few hundred years, 400 years before Jesus was born, if you look at it, it was one of the most challenging periods for the entire human race. Not just from the Bible. I know the Bible says it's a very significant event and, Jesus had to come as a savior. But I'm talking about historic records. So if you go to historic records and you do research, I'm going to show you some of it. You will see that it was one of the most challenging periods in human race. From a political, economic, and a scientific perspective, the birth of Jesus had a huge impact, because after the birth of Jesus, things started changing in a different and taking a whole different direction. So that is what I want to share with you today. I'm Natchi Lazarus, and I'm excited to share with you about the historical significance of the birth of Jesus. Let's get started. Now let's look at the significance of the timing of Jesus Christ's birth, which is our central topic of discussion. To do this, I want us to go to the Bible. Now, why do I want us to go to the Bible? Because the Bible, if you look at it from a history perspective, historians will agree that it is one of the most authentic history books, because it is not just a religious, spiritual book, but it's also a history book. It has a lot of important historic records because it was written by many kings. It's a compilation of multiple records that were maintained by kings and in their court by the scribes. So it has a lot of significant historical information. And the other logical reason why historians, whether they believe in the spiritual aspects or not, they still consider Bible as an important historic book is that it was written over a long period of time by multiple people. See, if you presented any kind of paper or thesis in college or in your study, you will know that we are all asked for references, right? Why? Because any record that is presented, if it has multiple references, then it's authentic. It gives authenticity. Then it means it has been vetted by many people, and it's good. The information is good. If you look at the Bible, it was written over hundreds of years by 66 different books written by multiple people. So even if somebody said something wrong, there was another person who was going to quote it and refer it. So you really can't go wrong, right? So that is another reason why Bible is a significant historic book. So let's go to the Bible. Come back to the subject. Let's go to the Bible and let's look at it and try to understand the timing. The timing is very interesting from a historic perspective. Timing, we know, starts, the Bible has two parts. It has an Old Testament and a New Testament. The Old Testament starts with Genesis, the beginning, and Old Testament goes on, the records in Old Testament goes on till 400 BC. Okay, that is from our calendar perspective. We have BC and AD, right? So in BC, it comes up to 400 BC. That's what we call as the Old Testament period. And then the New Testament starts at 5 AD. And then it goes on till now, current period, and then the future. Then the Bible talks about, the future and what's going to happen in the days to come. So that is what we call as the New Testament period. Now, this is interesting because there's a gap in between, right? You see a gap, right? So there are a few hundred years of gap, and that few hundred years is what we are going to focus on, because at the end of this 400 years is when Jesus came. Okay, so focus there. Now this gap, the few hundred year gap that we see is what we call as the intertestamental period, or the silent years. That's what experts call it, the silent years, because it's silent years because the Bible doesn't talk about it. There's not much record from a biblical perspective. But there are other historic records that talk about this silent period. So we can go back to those records and kind of refer what happened. So that's what I did, and that's what I want to share with you today. So let's focus on that intertestamental period. So if you look at that intertestamental period, the first thing I want to share with you is what happened from a political point of view. So those 400 years was chaotic, to say the least, because it was filled with wars. It had unstable rulers, constantly changing culture, because one kingdom after the other were fighting and replacing each other at short intervals. Because if you start at this period, the Babylonians were in power, and then the Persians came and overthrew the Babylonians, and then the Greeks came and overthrew the Persians, and then the Romans came and overthrew, the Greek. And then in between you see all the Maccabees and Asmonean dynasty. So to say the least, it was chaos. You and me living in democracies, most of us, we understand the importance of stable governance. The more stability is there in the governance, then there's more growth in the country, right? So for the nation to prosper, for a situation to be good, you need a stable governance, which was missing for hundreds of years. So literally, history says that was one of the most chaotic periods, which leads us logically to the economic situation, where we see what do you expect when there was constant war? Nothing, right? War disrupted trade and economies. Everything was disrupted. There was no progress in terms of business or entrepreneurship or growth, simply because nobody had the time. Everybody was focusing on their survival, right? You don't know when somebody's going to come and take away your children. Your house is going to be, bombed and, destroyed, and people die. And that was the situation. It was serious stuff. So people had no time to come up with creative solutions and innovations and inventions and, all the trade and entrepreneurship and startups. Never happened. So all the resources, because business depends on resources, right? You need resources to grow the economy. All that was focusing on fueling the war and feeding the war and exploitation of resources, because kings came and said, let's use this for war, and they were, grabbing lands and nations. Power was the big thing. Tax system was introduced, which means, economies were in doldrums. Because as it is, people are not making money, but they were expected to pay and fund the whole operations of the kings. So it was a chaotic situation when it came to economy. And one of the indicators of economy is science and innovation. So any scientist or historian will tell you that the more innovation and scientific progress happens, the economy will be better, right? Today we see so much progress, therefore economies are thriving. So if you look at the scientific part of that 400 years, it's very interesting, right? No major inventions whatsoever. So anything that science did was only to feed the war. Right? Nothing else happened. Especially, Britannica Almanac says only 3 major inventions were made in those 400 years. I want to just spend a few minutes on this because this has got something to do with human mind. You can imagine the mindset of people in these 400 years. There's war. Just imagine yourself being there, right? There's war, your family is at risk, your business is at risk, nothing is moving forward, there's no progress. Constantly the rulers are changing. One day the Persians are coming and saying you do this, then the Greeks are coming and saying you do this, then the Romans have a whole different dress code and culture and everything. There's constant unstable system. So look at your mindset of the people. So this is significant, because all this led to the timing in which Jesus was born. Because for us to understand the importance of the timing of the birth of Jesus, these things give us a lot of good context, So there was no forward thinking. There was no positive mental attitude. All focus was on survival and greed. People just wanted to survive. They'll do anything to protect themselves, their family, and to just stay alive. That was the situation. I want to show you some interesting graphs here, right? This is taken from Awesome Science. And if you look at the technological advances, right, I want to point something very interesting to you. I'm a graph guy. I'm a measurement analytics person. I love Google Analytics. I love Facebook Insights, all that kind of stuff. So I'm all for numbers and measurement. And if you look at this graph, it just throws the whole light on what was going on. So if you look at the theological advances and the awesome science quotes saying there was stone, tools, firewalls, and then fire, bow, and then writing, and then watermill, gunpowder, printing press. I mean, just only that much. And then comes the significant event that we are talking about, the birth of Jesus, right? So Christ's birth just falls at that particular point in time. And then look at what happens to the graph. Now, isn't that interesting? That is exactly what I wanted to show you today. This graph is what I wanted to show you. Something happened with Christmas. For us, we are celebrating Christmas. We're doing shopping and hanging out with friends, which is all great. I love that part of Christmas. But we also have to understand that in a larger perspective, Christmas was significant. Look what happened to the growth of human race, because the scientific advancement is a key indicator for betterment of lifestyle, living standards, and the way in which human civilization or life is moving forward. It's a very important indicator. So you can see what happened. Steam engine, telegraph, plastic, airplane, transistor, they're all starting to grow. It took a little while, but then things started picking up. So the pivot was something that happened at that point in time. I'll show you another graph. This comes from the Foundation of Teaching Economics. So if you see the same thing, right, as you go along, you see a steep, sharp, almost vertical rise in terms of time period, and the event that we're talking about, the birth of Jesus, happens right there. Now that is what excited me as I looked into this, and I said, wow, I need to share it with people. This is what I wanted to share with you. This is exciting, isn't it? Right? Look at the graphical sign. Now this is science. This is not from a spiritual religious book. This is from history and economics. So that is the significance of the timing of the birth of Jesus. Because I'll tell you, it makes sense. If you look at it logically, it makes sense. Because like I told you, it was all about the mindset of people. The war and the destruction and lack of growth, lack of progress messed up people's mind. They couldn't think clearly. But once things started changing, people started thinking differently. Something happened with the birth of Jesus that not only brought political stability into the system, it also brought clarity in human thinking, because political stability again gives way to economic and scientific innovations. See, it's the teaching that makes all the difference. It's what you hear. If you look at revolutions around the world, all the great leaders who have made an impact, you will see that what mattered was what they said, right? The book that they wrote, the speech that they gave, the words that they spoke. Look at all world leaders from any part of the world. Just look at the leaders who have really changed and impacted the human history. You will see what mattered was what they said. Their words, either spoken or written or any other words. And Jesus, if you look at him from a totally non-spiritual but historic leadership perspective, was somebody whose teaching was incredibly revolutionary. He spoke about forgiving your enemies. He radical stuff. He spoke about love. He said, love your enemies. If somebody hits you, show him the other cheek. Things that people never really thought of. And he said these things in a timing where people were killing each other. And he said, love your enemies. They said, oh, I thought I was supposed to kill my enemy, for hundreds of years. Now you're saying, love your enemy. That is a radical thing, right? What I'm saying is this. One of the key reasons that this world leader was different from any world leader. We haven't been celebrating world leaders' birthdays for 2,000 years. Not millions of people celebrate. Why do we still celebrate? Why is it still significant? Because this leader was different. This was probably the only leader that transformed people from inside out, because his words were full of life that just went into the hearts of people. It transformed leaders. If you see again, look at history. Many world leaders, kings and rulers, were touched by the teachings of Jesus. So they changed their ways, they changed the way they ruled people. And because they changed the way they ruled people, nations changed. And because nations changed, economies changed. And because economies changed, the world became a better place. And that is when we see this kind of graph. We see the growth in human, lifestyle. Because they were being impacted. The leaders were being impacted. The scientists were being impacted. People were being impacted by this radical, revolutionary teaching that came from this different leader, this man that was so different. He had words of life inside of him, So he just completely revolutionized history. So I want you to think about this in this Christmas time, and think about the personal significance that he has, because the same impact he has in your life personally, and he has had in this world. So I hope this helps you see Christmas in a new, fresh, different kind of perspective, because that is what Jesus came to give. Literally, his birth was a turning point in world history, and it has impacted all our human lives. Thank you for spending this time with me. Me and my family, we wish you a wonderful Christmas and a Happy New Year.